Wonderful. Hello, Hayes Lodgepole. I'm Heather, and welcome to your final session of ACT preparation. Again, we're working together on the English, reading, and writing portions of the exam. By this point, you've covered a lot of ground. You've thought a lot about relaxation strategies. You've considered ways to attack each of the various tests, things that you can do in your test booklet, and different ways to prepare for those different components of the exam. We've also started to dive pretty heavily into some content, some English rules and reading strategies that may be more or less familiar to you. Today we'll do a little bit more of that work, looking closely at some English concepts that will be helpful to you on the test to further hone in places where you'd like to continue to study. And of course, we're also going to back up and review all of the strategies we've talked about so far, their application, and hopefully by now you have selected strategies that are ideal for you. My hope has been to provide enough information to help you succeed to the best of your ability without in any way providing an overwhelming experience. If there is anything that you would like to dive into perhaps a little bit more, something that you believe needs more attention, if you are feeling overwhelmed, if you're feeling really proud, or if you would like to share any of your writing with me, please email me at inspiredclassroomheather@gmail.com. So let's go ahead and dive in. If you do not have a pen and paper or a laptop computer, please grab it now. Okay. So as we dive into this last session that we're sharing together, what do you believe is the most useful takeaway you've received in this course so far? This could be a specific strategy, this could be a mindset issue, this could be the ability to refine your own studies and your own work. Totally up to you. Take 3 minutes and jot down those ideas. Please pause the video now. So just beneath that response, please jot down, how have you grown the most? So this is slightly different from your biggest takeaway in that it's not something outside of you. Personally, in your own journey towards success on the ACT, what growth are you perhaps most proud of, or have you recognized the biggest change? Please pause the video now, right, for about 2 to 3 minutes. Great. And as we move into the final weeks before your exam, hopefully you have a very targeted plan for your continued efforts. If you don't, that's okay. Again, I'm absolutely available for questions, comments, concerns, any way that I can help you. But please do, underneath your last response, take another 2 to 3 minutes to jot down where you would like to focus your attention now. Great. Let's review. First and foremost, what makes the ACT different from other tests? Pause the video, quickly jot down your answer. Great, so if you wrote down something along the lines of the ACT is fundamentally different from other exams you may have taken before, or simply the ACT is different from a classroom test, perfectly fine, absolutely correct. Remember that there's no penalty for a wrong answer, so it's very, very important to answer every bubble on the ACT exam. Additionally, this isn't a matter of recalling the date that Napoleon sailed the ocean blue. I know that's totally incorrect. Terrible example. However, you don't need to recall those specific dates and examples as much as you need to be able to apply your learning to the information that they provide you on the page. It's not about, can I remember? It's more about, I can figure this out. Everything on the exam is material that you've learned in class, and all the answers are there on the page. It's just a matter of finding them where they are. How you find that answer doesn't matter, because unlike many classroom exams, you don't have to show your work as long as you can find the answer where it is on the page. So why does that matter? Maybe take 2 to 3 minutes and think a little bit about, jot down some thoughts on why does it matter that this exam is different? Great, so your responses probably varied. However, one of the biggest reasons why it matters that the ACT is different from a regular classroom exam is that the stakes are different. And that it's being used for a different purpose. So you might remember that colleges use your ACT score results for not only admission into the university, but also placement within different programs, from math to science to, in our case, writing, English, reading classes. Remember that the writing portion of the exam is visible to colleges. However, it's not totaled into your overall score. And I will run through that information with you once more so that it is available, so that you can screenshot or write down that information if you need it. Knowing what to expect is one of the best ways to succeed, not only on the ACT, but on other exams and in other high-stress situations as well. It can help calm those nerves and also save time when the rubber hits the road and you're sitting there on exam day. Excellent. All right, so we've talked about many ways to deal with the anxiety and sense of nervousness that can come from taking a fairly high-stakes test. If that's not something that you've experienced, great. If it is something that you've experienced, also great. That's totally normal, and there are ways to deal with it, ways that we've talked about and we'll review again. Being mindful of the environment around you, cultivating a sense of awareness of where you are as a physical body in a room at a specific time can really, really help shift your mind out of sort of that circular thinking that can lead to very anxious feelings. One of my favorites, as we mentioned before, is something called a 5 senses drill. This is really, really useful if you feel that you haven't been able to prevent that sense of nervousness. You're sitting there, your heartbeat's getting faster, and you're starting to sweat, and you're feeling really anxious. Plug into your senses. Look for 5 things you can see, 4 things you can smell, 3 things you can touch, and so on and so forth. There are many different versions of this available online if you need a specific format. However, checking in with your body and grounding yourself in the room is a really, really great way to beat those nerves. Additionally, planting your feet on the floor, back in the chair, deep breaths, and simply noticing and being where you are. Taking those few moments to relax can definitely help save time later down the road when that nervousness and anxiety could prevent you from finding the right answers on the page. Additionally, visualization is a great tool, not only for test preparation, but for life in general. So taking the time to think, and not only think about, but imagine what it looks like, what it tastes like, what it feels like to succeed on the ACT, who you'll tell first, where you would like to go with those results, the feelings that it will bring you, is a really great way to start building pathways in your brain that lead to greater success. Sort of in the same vein, positive thinking can help tackle many, many roadblocks that could come from spinning the wheels of negativity, so to speak. Believing that you can and will achieve the results that you are hoping for can pave the path to greater success, because you don't have to work through that stumbling block of believing that you can't and you won't. So either write down or think to yourself a few words, a few positive reminders that you can call up and remember when the time comes on exam day. And the more you practice that positive thinking, the easier it will be when you're kind of on the spot. Finally, deep breathing. Like we mentioned earlier, it plays a role in mindfulness and mindfulness exercises. And it can also be really useful on its own. Sitting in the room on test day, sitting in a chair at your desk at home during preparation if you begin to feel anxious. Again, plant your feet firmly on the floor. Scoot back in your chair. Feel your abdomen rise as you breathe deeply and slowly, sending that oxygen all the way down to your toes. Breathing out all the way from your toes throughout your body, sending that really vital oxygen throughout your body into your brain. If you like something a little bit more structured, 4-7-8 breathing is also very helpful. So of course, you'll try to get yourself in the same position, feet planted on the floor, body comfortable in the chair, back against the back of your seat. Breathe in for 4, hold your breath for 7, breathe out for 8. Let's go ahead and try that one now. Ready? Breathe in, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, release, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Let's do it one more time. Breathe in, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, breathe out, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Check in with your body and see how that feels. The great thing about all of these strategies, including deep breathing, is that no one has to know that you're doing them. So if you don't necessarily want to share the fact that you're having nervous feelings, you can do any of these strategies privately to take care of your body and mind and set yourself up for greater success on the exam. I would recommend practicing each of these and perhaps selecting a favorite that you know will be your go-to sort of safe strategy come test day. At this time, please star if you're taking notes, or jot down your favorite strategy now. Please pause the video if you need to. Okay. Great. Remember, answering all the questions is very important. We've talked about this over and over again, but if you work half the problems, get them right, guess on the other half, you'd get around a 23 in the top quarter of test takers. Whereas if you hurry and actually work through all the questions, even the ones that you know you're probably not going to get, and you only get half of them right, probably get around a 19, which is in the bottom half of test takers. Do keep that in mind. You know this information. Please feel free to pause the video, write any of this down, take a screenshot, find it online. Knowing how many questions and how much time you'll have going into the exam makes it easier for you to pace yourself and exercise those strategies such as triage and 3-passage strategy that rely a lot on time management. English and reading both scored on a scale of 1 to 36. You know that, averaged into your overall score. Again, writing is broken down a little bit differently. 4 categories for different writing traits, things that we can work on. If you want to go ahead and send me your essays based on the sample prompt online at the ACT website, I can talk you through how things look in your own writing regarding ideas and analysis, development and support, organization, and language use and conventions. Notice that these things are all weighted equally, so if there's something that you are very strong at and something that you are not, try to work on those things that you've identified as places to improve in your own writing to bring that entire average up. Again, that writing score is not calculated into your composite score, but colleges can see it and they do use it for placement purposes. So it matters. And again, a review of information regarding where those scores come from and what they look like. Most test takers score from 17 to 23, so if you're in that range, congratulations. If you're above that range, extra congratulations. Below that range, you still did a really excellent, challenging thing. Congratulations on being there in the room, and I look forward to the opportunity to help you through if you do it again. Many of those strategies that we've talked about so far plug into the ACT mindset. I won't necessarily ask you to jot down these because we've worked through them so many times, but just to review, don't think, can I remember? Think, I can figure this out. Think of each section as a separate life. Once you complete a section of the exam, let it go. It's out of your mind. Can't return to it. Simply focus on the section at hand. Think to yourself, should I answer this question or guess and move on? You might remember that triage strategy is a more structured way of deciding how to answer or guess and move on. And of course, should I come back to this question later or should I guess? Because remember, there's no penalty for guessing. Hopefully at this point you've sort of identified strengths and weaknesses as far as different question types. Knowing whether your issues are memorization, human error, or tricky questions can definitely help you focus your own studies as you work through the practice exams online. Take a moment, pause the video for another moment. In the last week, how have you now worked to address your most challenging error type? This should look a little bit different than the week before as we've started to get into more specific English and reading content. All right, here's a quiz. Do you remember what can you do when you are running out of time? You've used your strategies, you've mapped your passages, thought about which questions to answer and in what order. Time is still ticking, but you know you want to answer every question. What do you do? Pause the video. Jot down your thoughts. Okay. Great, so you might remember that it's helpful to look for specific line references and do them. These are questions where you don't have to search through the entire passage to get the information you need because it sends you to a specific place. These questions might sound like, in line 17, the author refers to his mother's cookies. Well, in that case, you know you can go right to line 17 and think about what it has to say. It's also helpful to refer to cited information in the passage and answer the questions as best you can with the information you find there. When a question quotes the passage itself, it's very similar to looking for those specific line references. That quoted information often has the answer packaged right into it. You don't have to go any further, and it's easier to make an educated guess if you don't know the answer. And finally, of course, make sure you answer every question, even if it's a guess. Even if you can't find a line reference, even if there is no quoted information, you can still take a guess because no answer is a wrong answer. A guess is a 25% chance of getting it right. Right. Hopefully, you remember many of the English strategies we've talked about so far, and you've identified the one that you think is best for you. Go ahead and pause that video again. Write down what you remember about specific English exam strategies. Great. You might have remembered that one of them is triage strategy. Triage strategy involves going through the exam once and identifying what questions can I answer now, answer them, What questions am I never going to be able to get? And what questions can I answer with a little bit more help? Triage simply means putting things in order of priority. Answer the ones you know, guess on the ones that you don't, come back to the ones that you can answer with a little bit more time. It's okay to write in your test booklet. So if you need to use a system to mark which ones you'd like to come back to, by all means, please do so. It's also very, very helpful to mark your answer in the test booklet as well as your answer sheet. It's really, really easy to get those answer bubbles off by one, which is a terrible feeling when you get to the end of the exam and you have one more question and you don't have any more answer bubbles. This way, if you have the answers circled in your test booklet, you can at least go back and move things to the correct place and identify where that mistake happened. Of course, it saves time to be mindful of which question you're answering on your answer sheet as you go. However, it's never a bad idea to have a plan B. I already gave it away, but you may have remembered that it's an excellent idea to write all over your test booklet. In English, you'll be looking for certain things like the author's main idea, transitions, various types of questions that come up if you identify a sentence that you know is wrong. Your native English speaking gut that you've been practicing since birth tells you this is not correct. Or something you've identified from learning in class, write it down. Identifying that answer before you even look on the test exam answers is a great way to save time. Be sure to read every word of a passage and every word of a sentence you plan to change. Often, sentences on the ACT English exam will be a little bit long, a little bit complicated, many conjunctions, and punctuation, and parts and pieces. They work together to create the whole, and you have to have all the information before you can know what's correct. You might remember that you want to look for verbose language and simplify that language. By now, probably remember that verbose means overly wordy, which is something that is really easy to get into when we write for page counts or for word counts. We know that we need to write a 5-page paper and we have 4 pages, so we find places to put in words that we might not necessarily need. On the ACT, that is considered incorrect. Keep your eyes peeled for overly wordy sentences and passages and simplify wherever you can. Generally, the most simple, correct answer is the right choice. Finally, as you're working through and doing your passage mapping, writing on your test booklet, look for transitions because they help reveal meaning. And they'll tell you the relationship between different parts of the essay and even within paragraphs themselves. Words like however, words like therefore, words like indeed tell you the relationship between ideas. All right, we are going to review the specific information from passage 3 that you prepared last time, and I would like to see if you can answer these questions this time without any help from the online exam. Get out your pen and paper, or tell your answers to a friend. However you'd like to respond is perfectly fine. First, what is the difference between it's, no apostrophe, and it's with an apostrophe? Next, when do you use superlative adjectives, for example, most? And when do you use comparative adjectives, for example, more? Number 3, when multiple answers are grammatically correct, which one should you choose? How can you identify the correct use of the verb to be? Another way to look at this question would be, how do we know if verbs agree? What does that even mean? Speaking of verbs agreeing, how do you know if a verb is in the correct tense? Do you use an apostrophe with plural or possessive words that end in the letter S? If so, how? How can you decide if a verb agrees with a subject in number? A really tricky instance that you might run across is family. Is family singular or plural? Can a word that ends in ing work as an adjective? Can ing words describe nouns? How can you figure out the meaning of an underlined part of a sentence? If you run across a word that you don't know, what can you do to figure it out? Are there times when it's acceptable to remove part of a sentence? If so, when? What is a conclusion in a paragraph or in a passage? What happens when a writer uses I or we in a piece of writing? What does that do to the tone? And what is considered correct tone on the ACT exam? Perfect. If you need to take a moment to rewind, take a look at some of those questions again, think about your answers, please do so. Hopefully, having gone through these questions a couple of times and now quizzed ourselves, you now know that these are concepts and ideas that are becoming a little bit more familiar to you. And as we work through passage 4 and later 5, you should be able to pick up on some of the same kinds of questions and the same patterns in those exams as well. You can expect the same kinds of questions on the ACT exam on test day. Some other things that tend to come up, words that sound alike, they're called homophones. They include should've, would've, could've versus should of, would of, could of. Classic example is there, there. Very, very important to know vocabulary in context so that you can distinguish between words that sound exactly the same but mean different things. You'll want to look for tricky uses of the verb to be, making sure even if that verb comes at the beginning of the sentence and the subject comes at the end, or vice versa, that you have chosen the correct tense and number for your verb, whether we're talking about I, or we, or they, several, one, as well as thinking about when this thing happened. So be, been, was, were. Review tenses as well as numbers. As you're looking for transitions, some specific things to look for include however, by contrast, on the contrary, conversely, meanwhile, although, nevertheless, therefore, thus, for example, to illustrate, in fact, on the one hand, on the other hand, additionally, moreover, in that sense, as second, finally, in addition, in summary, in contrast, and many, many more. If you would like to run through this list again, please feel free to pause the video now, jot them down, take a screenshot so that you can work on remembering some of these. Again, transition words reveal the relationship between sentences or paragraphs in a passage. Remember also that parallelism shows up on the ACT quite frequently. You tell me, jot it down, tell a friend, what is parallelism? Great, right. So parallelism happens when different parts of a sentence are built the same way. Verb object, verb object, verb object. If it's a 3-word, boop, 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 3-word section, each section should have 3 words. Those verbs should be conjugated in the same tense. So if 2 items in a list talk about past tense, the third one will, of course, also need to be in past tense. We'll look at another example of what that looks like in the exam today. Great, so just like last time, we're going to go through some specifics for passage 4, which we'll be looking at today. Underneath the work that you've already done, I would like you to write down your brief thoughts on these questions. They'll come in the same order that you'll see them on the exam when we get to that point, so it should be pretty easy to return to your ideas. First, how can you identify strong supporting evidence for a main topic? What does that mean? Well, strong supporting evidence means good reasons. A main topic is the theme, basically what the passage is about. So strong supporting evidence for a main topic means good reasons that the author is using to explain their main idea. How do you know where that evidence can be found in a passage? Hopefully remember this one. What is verbose writing? And is verbose writing considered correct on the ACT exam? Probably remember this one as well. What is parallelism? When are adjectives, describing words, considered useful, and when can they be omitted? Are there times when it's acceptable to leave out an adjective? Are there times when it's better to put an adjective in? Is it more correct to use specific or general language? We hear about run-on sentences all the time, but what is a run-on sentence? Are run-on sentences considered correct? Here's kind of a new piece of information. If multiple choices are correct, you've probably looked for the one that is the most concise or shortest and still correct. If multiple choices are correct and they are equally concise, meaning they are all pretty short, identify the specific answer that's consistent with the passage tone. If the passage is a formal piece of academic writing, the word man might be considered more correct than dude. If the passage is an informal piece of fiction writing or a quote from a main character, maybe dude might be appropriate. That's why it's very important to identify that tone and the author's purpose and jot it down in the margins of your test booklet. We've talked a little bit about using transition words to figure out how the pieces of a passage work together and determine what the author really means to say. But is it ever okay to omit those transition words? Are they ever unnecessary? This is kind of a big general one, but just write down your basic thoughts. How can you decide when to use a comma? How and where can you find the main focus of a paragraph? Can that help you figure out the main purpose of the passage? Again, practice your subject-verb agreement considering tense and number. How can quotation marks be used for rhetorical effect? And what that means, rhetorical is how you communicate yourself on the page, how you convince your audience of an idea. So can quotation marks ever do anything other than tell you a direct quote? If so, how and why? Okay. now that you've jotted down those answers, feel free to back up if you need to pause it, look at any of the words on the screen to find those answers. Remember, it's always best to know the answer here before you look for it on the page. The answer is always there on the page, but knowing the path that you'll take to get there can save you time. So we're going to hop over to the ACT practice exams and look at exam number 4. Okay. Wonderful. Please pause the video now and read through the passage Vatican City's Wonders using the strategy that best suits you. You might be looking for items that you know are incorrect, places where you feel there's missing information, underline areas where you feel the sentence reveals the author's purpose and the tone of the passage, jot down the main idea, the basic gist, the heart of each paragraph, and other ideas that you have, perhaps circling transition words. Please pause the video now and read that passage. Great, and now that you have read that passage, let's hop over to these questions and see if we can use the information that we just reviewed to find the answers to these test questions. First, given that all the choices are true, which best supports the sentence's claim about Vatican City's status as an independent nation? We know that number 1 is referring to this passage here. Surrounded by the ancient city of Rome, Vatican City is an independent nation on the west bank of Tiber River. Let's jump back over to the question. Given that all the choices are true, we are to assume that every answer is correct. Which one best supports the sentence's claim about Vatican City's status as an independent nation? We are looking for that strongest piece of evidence to support a main idea. A, no change. So that would mean, do we think that on the west bank of the Tiber River really supports the idea that Vatican City is an independent nation? Would it be possible to be on the west bank of the Tiber River and not be an independent nation? Perhaps. B, with an interesting past. Vatican City is an independent nation with an interesting past. That doesn't really tell me much about the independence of Vatican City. C, with its own government banking system, postal service, and army. That's really specific. That gives me 4 specific reasons why Vatican City can operate as an independent nation. That's promising. However, you might remember that we always read every answer before we select the one that we're going to choose as correct. If you've decided to work this question. If you feel like this question is something that, I don't know, I'm probably never going to get it, might be a good option to guess. However, since we have a specific line reference, we'll look at D, that has to import most of its supplies, even such necessities as food and water. It's sort of one of those instances where vocabulary in the context of the sentence makes a difference. What does the word import mean? Yeah, import means that you have to take those supplies from someone else. If you have to import food and water from somewhere else, it doesn't tell me that they're very independent. So we can safely opt for C, with its own government banking system, postal service, and army. Okay, let's take a look at number 2. Choose the best answer. You might notice that the numbers aren't in numerical order. Please pay very close attention to that on test day and make sure that you're referring to the right sentence, otherwise you may feel quite confused. This tiny country, about 1/6 of a square mile in all, is also home to a disproportionately large number of sites with great historical, artistic, and which have religious significance. All right, this tiny country, about 1/6 of a square mile in all. I'd like you to try to do this one on your own. Please read through all of the answers before you select the one that you believe is correct. Jot down the correct answer. All right, number 3. The phrase which have may have sort of alarmed your English-speaking brain alert bell. This tiny country, about 1/6 of a square mile in all, is also home to a disproportionately large number of sites with great historical, artistic, and which have religious significance. If you identified this as a case of parallelism, congratulations, that's awesome. This is exactly what parallelism looks like on the page. We have a list with 3 items, and we know that each of those items needs to look exactly the same. A large number of sites with great historical, artistic, and which have religious significance. The words historical, artistic, and religious all do the same job in the sentence. If you feel like the phrase which have doesn't need to be in there, your instincts are probably serving you correctly. And in this case, it's correct to omit the underlined portion. And number 4, we see the questions that looked a little bit out of order. This tiny country, about 1/6 of a square mile in all, is also home to a disproportionately large number of sites. If the writer were to delete the words tiny and disproportionately from the preceding sentence, the sentence would primarily lose elements of the setting of the essay, a contrast emphasizing the unusual number of sites, details that stress how important the sites are, a comparison between Vatican City and Rome. Well, if we're wondering what will happen if the writer deletes the words tiny and disproportionately, that's exactly what we should do. Well, let's try it. This tiny country, about 1/6 of a square mile in all, is also home to a disproportionately large number of sites with great historical, artistic, and religious significance. This country, about 1/6 of a square mile in all, is also home to a large number of sites with great historical, artistic, and religious significance. It seems like maybe those extremes aren't as extreme without those added words. Elements of the setting? No. Details that stress how important they are. Those words don't tell me anything about how important they are. A comparison between Vatican City and Rome. No, I don't see that in the passage. We'll go with details that stress how important the sites are. A contrast emphasizing the unusual number of sites. And finally, back up to number 5. The Vatican Museums house a great many valuable paintings, sculptures, pieces of jewelry, and tapestries. Given that all the choices are true, which one best emphasizes the extent and worth of the museum's holdings? A, no change. B, thousands of invaluable. C, numerous important. D, a group of precious. Backing up to number 5, a great many valuable. Let's take a look. Thousands of invaluable, numerous important, a group of precious. This is a case in which it makes sense to find the most specific answer because they are all equally concise and they give us the same information. Arguably, you might feel that thousands is the most specific way to emphasize the value of the museum's holdings. And of course, as always, you can click Answer. move up, and cruise through. Whoop. So you, of course, probably noticed that I did click F instead of E for number 2. Again, real time emphasizes how important it is to make sure that you aren't experiencing any of those human error kinds of mistakes, because it happens to everyone. It can happen in preparation, it can happen on test day. If we were to click that answer, send it away, ship it out, we wouldn't be able to go back and fix it. However, had you circled that correct answer on your test booklet before marking it on your answer sheet, you would have a better chance of making sure that you filled in the right bubble. Okay, clicking through. You might even notice that some of the answers that the ACT board provides for these questions matches what you wrote down during the questions before. You know this information. It's things that you've kind of worked with in school and things that you can find and study, so you can feel pretty good about noticing how your own sense of language matches with what they're looking for on the exam. All right, let's click over to the next page. Hey. Using the information from the questions that we went through before, I would like you to answer this set of questions yourself. Feel free, if you need to jump up and stretch or visit the restroom, take a break, take care of your body, please feel free to do so. Test day will be a little bit more regimented. However, for our purposes now, please feel free to take care of those needs at any time. Pause the video. Respond to these questions. So number 6, which of the following alternatives to the underlined portion would not be acceptable? You'll notice that not is in huge capital bold letters. It's asking you for what won't work. If you were skimming your questions and not necessarily reading them thoroughly, you might miss that information and get really confused about the fact that there are multiple correct answers. The word not is a trigger that says, pay close attention, I need to flip my thinking and look for the opposite kind of response. So let's cruise down to number 6. The Vatican Museums house a great many valuable paintings, sculptures, pieces of jewelry, and tapestries, as well as the world's most extensive collections of ancient manuscripts. In this case, we can actually try out these different words. Vatican Museums house a great many valuable paintings, sculptures, pieces of jewelry, and tapestries, in addition to. That means the same thing as well as. That one must be correct. Vatican Museums house a great many valuable paintings, sculptures, pieces of jewelry, and tapestries, besides the world's most extensive collections of ancient manuscripts. Well, doesn't mean exactly the same thing, but it's not technically incorrect. Also, there is. The Vatican Museums house a great many valuable paintings, sculptures, pieces of jewelry, and tapestries. Also, there is the world's most extensive collections of ancient manuscripts. Interesting. That one sort of triggers my English instincts. We'll return to that. H and also. The Vatican Museums house a great many valuable paintings, sculptures, pieces of jewelry, and tapestries, and also the world's most extensive collections of ancient manuscripts. That sounds fine. This also there is makes me wonder. Do you recall your definition of a run-on sentence? You may have remembered that a run-on sentence is smashed together with a comma where a period should go. 2 complete thoughts that don't have a conjunction, such as and, but, or, yet, or any other kind of punctuation. A comma cannot combine two complete thoughts by itself. In this case, also there is, starts another sentence. Boop, starts another sentence. In which case you would need a period. So, letter G is the least correct response. For number 7, you probably noticed that we're dealing with questions of tone. Probe versus grab an eyeful of, check out, and pry. Number 8 is a tricky example of the question regarding the role of transitions. Are transitions always necessary? If we are moving dramatically from one topic to another, a word such as accordingly would connect those things in a way that doesn't make sense. If you need to go back and readdress that answer, please feel free to do so. Number 9 is a case where it's important to look really carefully at the kind of punctuation that you see. Can be one of those tricky kinds of questions. But be sure that if your eyes are seeing a period, you're really seeing a period. And if you're seeing a comma, you're really seeing a comma. And number 10 hopefully uses some of the information that you noted when you were working through the passage and making notes about what you've read. At this point, the writer is considering adding the following true statement. In addition to being an architect and artist, Michelangelo wrote poetry, including more than 300 sonnets. Should the writer make this addition here? Notice that word here. We're not simply looking at whether or not we want to include this additional information about Michelangelo. We are also thinking about whether 10 here is the right place for it. So when you read this paragraph, you might have made a note that said this paragraph is about architecture. Or if you're writing down just themes, even just the word buildings, the word architecture tells you that perhaps information about poetry might not live in that spot. If we know that it doesn't belong there, we can narrow it down to 2 options. If you're running out of time, now's the point when it might be okay to guess. If you have time, we can look at the reasons that it provides. No, because it distracts attention from the paragraph's focus, which is on the architecture and visual art of St. Peter's. No, because it adds more information about Michelangelo, who made only small contributions to Vatican City's art and architecture. We know for a fact that Michelangelo's contributions were not small. So we can safely say, based on process of elimination and your excellent passage mapping and note-taking, G is the correct response. Again, you can click Answer, look through your responses, and finally, move on to the last set of questions. Right, at this point, I would like you to tackle the last set of questions independently, questions 11 through 15. I would like you to connect those questions to the work that we answered in our PowerPoint session. And I'd also like you in these 5 questions to keep track of ideas that are a little bit more challenging or complicated for you so you know where to dive in moving forward. Please pause the video and respond to those questions now. Okay. And I would now like you to independently practice using that answer function, and I'm just selecting bubbles so that we can see once more that answer function in the way that the ACT explains the answers. To check your own answers and examine the reasons for either correct or incorrect responses. Okay, fantastic. We made it through passage 4. At this time, after you finish those 5 questions, again, feel free to stretch if you need to, take a break, take care of yourself, totally fine. If you need to work on some of those relaxation and mindfulness exercises, now might be a really great time to practice those as well. Okay, excellent. Now that we've worked through some specific English stuff, we're going to go back a step and review general reading strategies. Please pause the video, take 2 to 3 minutes, and write down what you remember about reading specific strategies for the ACT. Great, you probably remembered that active reading is a really important part of success on the reading portion of the ACT. What is active reading anyway? Great, if you said that active reading means asking yourself questions about the text as you go, you are correct. Or some version of that response. Absolutely correct. Ask yourself questions about what's happening in the text, about what the author wants to say, about how the reader is meant to respond to that text and the job that it's doing. Active reading is somewhere between skimming and scanning, which is the fastest read that you can possibly do, and close reading, which is very, very slow, in-depth reading of every single word, phrase, sentence, and paragraph in a passage. Active reading sort of splits the difference, hits it right in the middle. You get the main information as you read the entire passage, while still doing so efficiently with attention to detail. You might also remember that we've talked about 3-passage strategy. There are 4 passages on the reading portion of the ACT exam, but they are about different things. If you know that reading takes a little bit more time, and in many cases it does, eliminate the passage that you like the least. Guess on all 10 of those questions. That leaves you with only 3 passages to work through, with a better chance of getting those correct. Remember, at the very, very beginning, we mentioned that if you were to work half of the questions and guess on the other half, might be an average of 23 as long as you got that half correct. Whereas, if you pushed yourself to work all of them and you only got half of them correct, then you would get a 19. Which is in the bottom half of scores. So guessing is okay if that happens to work with your time frame. If you work quickly, totally fine. This might not be the strategy for you. Oop. Oh, thank you, Apple. Boop. Okay. Great. So, after you've gone through and you've done your active reading, asking yourself questions about the passage, thinking about what the author is doing, how the different parts work together, as you go back through for your second read, looking for information in the questions, you'll probably use the strategy of skimming and scanning, reading quickly, looking for words that stand out and things that you've noticed from the test questions that stand out in the passage. You can make a star, a check mark, underline, make notes of the things that stand out to you while you are skimming and scanning. Just like in the English portion of the exam, passage mapping can be a really, really helpful way to know how the pieces of a passage work together. Sort of like outlining your own persuasive writing. Make a note of the main topic, introduction, conclusion, transitions between ideas, and the ways that the different paragraphs work as evidence or support for the main idea. If you've decided that 3-passage strategy That's the one where you guess on the one you like the least, then go back to your first favorite, do your second favorite, do your third favorite. If that's not for you, if you know that you can work through all of the passages and get them done correctly and in time, you might want to start with a passage that you prefer. Remember that we'll be covering prose fiction, social studies, humanities, and natural sciences. If one of those stands out to you and you know that you'll be very successful at it and that it will be quick to get those answers down, feel free to start with the one you like. And finally, just like in the English portion of the exam, you'll want to look for transitions, and in this case, adverbs as well. Adverbs are words that describe the action. Words that talk about the action in a passage can reveal a lot about what the author is trying to accomplish. You might want to underline, star, highlight places where you find adverbs and transitions. All right, and just like for the English portion, we are going to go back through those concepts that we worked with for passage 3, this time for reading. Since you've been through them once, then practice the answers to those questions. You should be able to recall this information immediately and feel really proud of having that information sort of in hand as you walk in on test day. So go ahead and just jot down a quick answer to each of these. Feel free to pause the video in between times or simply turn and tell a friend. Beginning with, when an answer lists multiple items, ensure that every portion of the answer is correct. How? How do you summarize a paragraph? How can you keep track of multiple names or characters in a passage? How do you know when a question in the text is rhetorical? How can you figure out words that you don't necessarily know? Feel free to spend a little bit more time with those if you need. It probably came really quick because you've practiced this, you're getting it, and it's going to come right back to you on test day when it's time to apply this understanding. Moving forward, as we look at passage 4, the following questions will line up with the questions as we, with the exam questions as we get to them. So you'll be able to return to these ideas and sort of practice going through those pathways and bringing back that information that you already know, and being able to find it on the page. So first, how do you identify the main point of an entire passage? How can you identify evidence in a passage in paragraphs? What's an analogy? And why would an author use an analogy? How can you tell if an author is using satire as a writing strategy? When an author might be a little bit sarcastic, or they're using words in a way that is surprising or unexpected to make a point. We know that it's a good idea to make an educated guess about the meaning of a word you don't recognize. How do you do that? Where do you look for that information? Can an answer be considered correct on the ACT if the evidence cannot be found in the text? Remember, of course, that the ACT in the English exam and in the reading portion is looking for the most technically correct answer. So although many of these items are things that in your heart you know that you would like to stick up for a different response, you believe that there's room for creativity and flexibility, the ACT does not provide room for that sort of dialogue in the English and reading exam. And even as we move into the writing part, the most technically correct writing is generally scored the best. And that can be really challenging for empowered learners and empowered writers who like to be in charge of where their words go. But in this case, the ACT is one of those things where we simply must oblige by what they ask of us. Okay. Go ahead and jump over to the reading practice exam. All right. And of course, we're looking again at passage 4. Passage 4 is a natural science passage called How to Build a Baby's Brain. Please pause the video, take a moment, read this passage now. I'll jump in on number 1. The main point of this passage is to. In this case, you may have jumped back to your notes about how to identify the main point of a passage. You might remember that it's really easy to find that main thesis in the beginning and the end of a passage. You might have even practiced this in your own writing, your introduction and your conclusion. Tell us basically what it is that we are about to read and what it was that we just read. This kind of writing is exactly the same. So look in either of those places for the main point of this passage. Is it A, to illustrate the importance of genetics in the formation of a baby's brain? B, illustrate the importance of stimulation and experience in the formation of a baby's brain? C, indicate the great need for conducting further research on babies' brains? D, compare the latest research on babies' brains with similar research conducted 15 years ago. Take a moment if you need to reread introduction, conclusion. Consider your response. It's best to have that idea in mind before you find it here on the page. Number 2, the main point made in the second, third, and fourth paragraphs. This is one of those places where you have a specific line reference, especially if you're really good at skimming and scanning, and you're running out of time, you can go back to that second, third, and fourth paragraphs to find an answer. That might be a little bit more difficult if the question is asking something about the entire passage. Is the main point of those paragraphs that the baby's brain is E, genetically determined before the child is born, F, can be seen through positron emission tomography, can be altered through a process known as pruning, or H, is still developing after the child is born? Okay. Using your notes and your reading strategies, I'd like you to answer questions 3 through 5 independently. Please pause the video, work through those questions now. Remember to identify the correct answer in your mind before you start looking for it on the page. It will save you time in the reading portion of the exam. Great. And again, I'd like you to use that answer function. I'm just going to click through. So again, we can look at some of the wording for both correct and incorrect responses. Right. Scrolling all the way down to the bottom, click answer. Great. Take a moment now and compare your answers to the answers the ACT has provided. Again, you'll probably notice that the reasons they offer for those correct and incorrect responses is very well aligned with your answers to the questions we talked about before beginning this portion of the online exam. Okay, once you've had a chance to read and compare, again, always making a note of whether memorization, human error, or tricky questions are a bigger issue for you. Hop on over to that next page. You can either click at the top or down at the bottom. We're already scrolling, so we'll go all the way to the bottom. Great. And please go ahead and complete 6 through 10 independently using the answer function to check your responses, keeping track of what kinds of mistakes you might be making. And during this second set of 5, I would also like you to pay close attention to how much time you are taking per question. Remember that being aware of how many questions you have to answer, the time you have allotted to answer them, can help alleviate some of that anxiety and also make sure that you're working as efficiently as possible on test day. Please pause the video now. We're at questions 6 through 10. Great. And we'll just go ahead and use that answer function again. You may notice that question 7, for instance, calls on vocabulary in context. You may have jotted down in your notes that if you don't know what a word means in a passage, you can use the information around it to make a strong guess. The way that a word works in a sentence and the context can tell you a lot, even if it's a word that you've never seen before. Great. You may have also noticed that question 5 on the last page, as well as just question 5 on the last page, involves the word least. Similar to the question involving the word not on the English portion of the exam. Pay close attention to that big capital bold word least. It's asking you to switch your thinking and to think about which answer doesn't fit, which response doesn't work. Awesome. Perfect. So once you have completed those questions, keeping track of what's working, what's not working, things that you still have questions about, questions, of course, that you can always email to me at inspiredclassroomheather@gmail.com. And we'll think a little bit more about writing that essay. At this point, hopefully, you have read the prompt online. That won't be the prompt that you receive on the test itself. However, it is structured in the same way and calls on the same skills. So again, hopefully you have read the example prompt that is available online. Ideally, you've also read the sample essays and the reasons for those scores. It's helpful to look for the 4 different categories of writing skill that the ACT is looking for as you read the score justifications, which we can look at right now. Great. So, not only does this explanation tell us that this essay received a score of a 1, but it tells us ideas and analysis received a 1, here's why. Development and support received a 1, here's why. Organization 1, here's why. Language use 1, here's why. Look for these pieces of evidence in the example itself, and as you go through and write your own practice essay, look for ways that your own writing either fits the pattern that the ACT board is looking for, modeled after those really high 5 and 6 scores, or ways that your patterns might fall more in line with the 1s and 2s and ways that you can improve upon them. Be sure again to read the entire prompt. We've gone through it a couple of times, but read every portion of the paragraph they provide you. That is the context for your own essay. And you are also asked to develop the relationship between your point of view, your opinion on the prompt, and one of the 3 perspectives they provide. So that means you have to read all of those perspectives as well to be able to tell us not only what you think and expand on the perspective provided, but how those things work together. If you agree, if you disagree, or if it's a little bit more complicated. I agree, but only in these situations. Or I disagree, except for X, Y, and Z. Again, the very, very, very best way to improve your persuasive writing is to do it often, and to receive feedback on that writing. A 5-paragraph essay is a great way to go. It's not the be-all, end-all writing strategy. In many cases, it's not necessarily the best way to go, but when you're in a timed setting like the ACT, and you might not be sure exactly where you want to go, outline your 5 paragraphs, intro, conclusion, body paragraphs, evidence, before you begin writing. Even if you take as little as 5 to 7 minutes to write that outline before you start writing your essay, the writing portion will go much, much more quickly and you'll be able to work more efficiently. Please, if you have not already written a practice essay responding to this prompt, go ahead and do so either today or tomorrow, sometime this week. Send it to that email address and I will respond to you with feedback about the different portions, all of the different categories of evaluation of that writing, where that might potentially fit within the score. Not that I am, of course, an official ACT scorer. I am not, but I've had a lot of practice with this kind of writing, so I'll be able to let you know ways that you can improve and things that you're doing really, really well. Awesome. Perfect. Well, this is our last time together, but as always, I am completely available to you as questions come up between now and the testing time. You've come a really long ways. You've learned about relaxation strategies, you've learned about English strategies, reading strategies, and writing strategies, and worked on some really complicated, specific English and reading stuff that will all serve you well come test day. I believe in your ability to apply the information that you know and achieve your goals. Thank you very much for being with me, and I look forward to hearing from you. Bye.